Have you ever had that feeling where you're sitting in a completely ordinary moment, maybe drinking coffee or staring out a window, and suddenly you become hyper-aware that time is passing, like you can almost feel the seconds dissolving around you, carrying you forward into a future that doesn't exist yet while simultaneously pushing you away from a past that no longer exists? That feeling, that sudden vertigo when you realize you're trapped in this razor-thin slice of now between an infinite past and an infinite future, that's your consciousness brushing up against one of the most profound mysteries in all of existence. Time. We think we understand it. We measure it with clocks, organize our lives around it, treat it like it's this obvious, straightforward thing that flows from past to future at a steady, reliable rate. But here's what's going to blow your mind. Everything you think you know about time is wrong. Not just a little wrong, but fundamentally, completely, reality-shatteringly wrong. Time doesn't flow. The past doesn't disappear. The future isn't waiting to happen. And the present, that moment you think you're experiencing right now, doesn't actually exist at all. I'm about to take you on a journey that will completely demolish your understanding of when you are and whether the concept of are even makes sense in a universe where time might be the most elaborate illusion ever created. We're going to explore why some of the greatest physicists who ever lived concluded that time is fundamentally unreal, why your memories might be spontaneously creating themselves right now rather than recording actual past events, and why there might be infinite versions of this exact moment existing simultaneously in a timeless, eternal now. But before we dive into the deep end where logic goes to die, let me give you fair warning. This journey is going to mess with your head in ways that will follow you long after you've finished hearing these words. You're going to question whether yesterday actually happened, whether tomorrow will ever arrive, and whether this present moment is anything more than an arbitrary point in a static four-dimensional structure where all of time exists simultaneously. The implications of what we're about to explore are so disturbing that some philosophers have literally lost sleep over them, driven to existential crisis by the realization that the flowing river of time they'd experienced their entire lives might be nothing more than a persistent hallucination generated by their consciousness. So if you've ever wondered whether you're actually moving through time or if time is moving through you, if you want to understand why Einstein said the distinction between past, present, and future is merely a stubbornly persistent illusion, or if you're ready to have your entire relationship with existence fundamentally transformed, then strap in, because what you're about to learn will change how you experience every moment for the rest of your life, assuming life and rest and moments are even real concepts, which after this journey you might seriously doubt. Let's start with something that seems simple. Right now, as you're processing these words, you're experiencing what you call the present moment. It feels immediate, real, alive in a way that your memories of the past don't feel, and your imaginings of the future can't match. This present moment seems to have a special quality, a nowness that distinguishes it from all other moments. But here's the first crack in your reality. What exactly is the present moment? How long does it last? Try to pinpoint it. Is the present moment 1 second long? That can't be right because you can subdivide a second into smaller pieces, milliseconds, microseconds, nanoseconds. Is the present moment one of those? But you can subdivide those too, infinitely. When you try to actually grab hold of the present, it vanishes between your fingers like smoke. The moment you identify something as now, it's already become then. By the time your brain processes sensory information and creates the experience of consciousness, the events that triggered that experience are already in the past. When you see a star in the night sky, you're seeing light that left that star years or even centuries ago. You're never seeing it now, you're seeing its past. But it gets weirder. Even when you look at your own hand right in front of your face, the light takes time to travel from your hand to your eyes. Your optic nerve takes time to transmit signals to your brain. Your brain takes time to process that information and construct the visual experience. By the time you experience seeing your hand, the actual physical events that created that experience are already over. You've never experienced anything in real time. You're always living in the past, even if it's just microseconds in the past. Your entire life is a delay, a recording played back to you slightly after the fact. But here's where it starts getting really disturbing. Those microseconds of delay aren't the same for all your senses. Sound travels slower than light, so when you watch someone speak, you see their lips move slightly before you hear the words. Except you don't notice this because your brain cleverly stitches the experiences together to create the illusion of simultaneity. Touch signals travel through your nerves at different speeds, depending on what type of sensation you're feeling. Your brain receives information from all your senses at different times, then works backward to create a unified experience of a single present moment that never actually existed. The now you're experiencing is a fabrication, a constructed narrative your consciousness creates by combining inputs that arrived at different times and presenting them to you as if they happened simultaneously. You're not experiencing reality as it happens. You're experiencing an edited highlight reel that your brain assembled from footage that came in at different times. But let's zoom out from your personal experience of time and look at what physics tells us about time's fundamental nature. For thousands of years, humans assumed time was universal, that there was one cosmic clock ticking away uniformly throughout the universe, that when you experience now, everyone everywhere was experiencing the same now simultaneously. Then Einstein came along and destroyed that comfortable assumption forever. Special relativity revealed something so counterintuitive that even a century later, most people can't truly wrap their heads around it. Time is relative. It passes at different rates depending on how fast you're moving and how deep you are in a gravitational field. This isn't some tiny technical correction to Newtonian physics. This is a fundamental restructuring of what time actually is. If you travel very fast or hang out near a massive object like a black hole, time literally slows down for you relative to someone who's stationary or far from gravity. Not your perception of time, not your subjective experience, but actual time itself. When astronauts spend time on the International Space Station moving at orbital speeds, they age slightly slower than people on Earth. When they return, they've traveled a tiny fraction of a second into Earth's future. This has been measured. It's not theory, it's documented fact. GPS satellites have to account for both special and general relativistic time dilation, or they'd give you completely wrong positions within minutes. The satellites are moving fast, which makes their clocks run slower, but they're also further from Earth's gravity, which makes their clocks run faster, and engineers have to carefully balance these effects to make the system work. We've built our global infrastructure around the fact that time is relative, but the implications of this are absolutely reality-shattering. If time passes at different rates in different places, then there is no universal now. When you say something is happening right now on a distant planet, you're saying something that has no objective meaning. Someone moving relative to you would disagree about which events on that planet are happening now. You might say an alien on that planet is currently eating breakfast, while someone speeding past you in a spacecraft might say that same alien hasn't been born yet, while someone speeding past in the other direction might say that alien died 1,000 years ago. You're all equally correct, because there is no objective truth about what's happening now somewhere else. Simultaneity is relative. The idea that the universe exists in a single present moment shared by everyone is simply false. This destroys the common sense notion of time flowing uniformly throughout the cosmos. Instead, each observer has their own personal timeline, their own sequence of present moments, and these timelines don't line up neatly with anyone else's. Your now is not my now. We're each living in our own temporal bubble, our own personal slice through space-time, and these slices intersect in ways that would seem impossible if Einstein hadn't proven mathematically that this is how reality actually works. But if simultaneity is relative, if there's no universal present moment, then what does that mean for the past and future? This is where things get truly metaphysically disturbing. In Newtonian physics, the past definitely happened, the present is happening now, and the future hasn't happened yet. Nice and simple. Time flows from past through present into future like a river. But relativity destroys this picture completely. If there's no universal present, then there's no meaningful distinction between past, present, and future. Instead, all of time exists simultaneously in what physicists call the block universe. Imagine time as a spatial dimension, like a fourth dimension added to the three spatial dimensions we move through. Just as all of space exists simultaneously, with your house and your friend's house and distant galaxies all existing at the same time in different places. All of time exists simultaneously, with yesterday and today and tomorrow all existing in different whens. Your birth, your death, everything that's ever happened and ever will happen to you exists right now in the four-dimensional structure of space-time. It's all already there, laid out like a landscape. The flow of time, the feeling that you're moving from past to future, is an illusion generated by your consciousness. You're not moving through time. You exist as a four-dimensional object stretched out through space-time, a world line that extends from your birth to your death, and every moment along that world line exists equally. The you that's experiencing this moment is no more real than the you that ate breakfast yesterday or the you that will go to sleep tonight. They all exist simultaneously in the block universe. When Einstein's close friend Michele Besso died, Einstein wrote a letter to Besso's family saying, "Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me. That means nothing. People like us, who believe in physics, know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Think about what Einstein is saying here. The man who revolutionized our understanding of space and time is telling us that the flow of time, the thing that feels most fundamentally real about our existence, is an illusion. Yesterday hasn't disappeared into some void of non-existence. Tomorrow isn't waiting in some realm of pure potentiality. All of it, all of time, exists right now in the eternal four-dimensional present of the block universe. But if that's true, then nothing ever really happens. Or rather, everything happens, but nothing becomes. You don't transition from being a child to being an adult. Both the child, you, and the adult, you exist eternally at different points in your world line. Events don't occur and then cease to be. They simply are, frozen in their eternal when. This view of time, called eternalism, means that your entire life already exists, completely determined, stretched out through space-time like a sculpture. Free will becomes very hard to explain in this framework because your future decisions already exist in the block universe, just as real and fixed as your past actions. You're not creating the future through your choices. You're discovering a future that already exists. Or maybe you're not even discovering it. Maybe there's just a four-dimensional object that includes all your experiences arranged in temporal order, and the feeling of moving through those experiences, of making choices and determining outcomes, is just part of the eternal pattern, a subjective quality of consciousness that emerges from the way information is organized in the block universe. But eternalism isn't the only weird implication of modern physics. Let's talk about what quantum mechanics has to say about time, because if relativity made time strange, quantum mechanics makes it absolutely insane. In the quantum world, particles exist in superposition, occupying multiple states simultaneously until they're observed. An electron can be spinning clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time. A photon can go through both slits in a double-slit experiment simultaneously. This isn't just ignorance about which state the particle is really in. The particle genuinely exists in all possible states at once until measurement collapses the superposition into a single outcome. But here's what should absolutely terrify you. If particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, can time itself exist in superposition? Can multiple timelines exist simultaneously until observation collapses them into a single experienced timeline? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest exactly this. In the many worlds interpretation, every quantum measurement doesn't collapse superposition into a single outcome. Instead, the universe branches into multiple parallel timelines, with each possible outcome occurring in a different branch. Every time a quantum event could go multiple ways, reality splits into multiple versions, each experiencing a different outcome. This means that every decision you've ever made, every random quantum event that could have gone differently, has spawned alternate timelines where things did go differently. There are versions of you right now who made different choices at every major crossroads in your life. Versions who took different jobs, married different people, lived in different cities. Versions who died in accidents you narrowly avoided in this timeline. versions where you never existed because your parents never met. All of these timelines are equally real, branching, and splitting every instant as quantum events play out in every possible way. You're not experiencing one linear progression from past to future. You're experiencing one path through an endlessly branching tree of possibilities, and every other path is being experienced by other versions of you in parallel timelines that are just as real as this one. But it gets even stranger. If quantum superposition applies to time itself, then past, present, and future might not be linearly ordered at all. Events might exist in temporal superposition, occurring in multiple temporal orders simultaneously until observation forces them into a particular sequence. Some interpretations of quantum gravity suggest that space-time itself is quantum, that it exists in superposition of different possible geometries, different possible causal structures. At the deepest level, there might not be a fixed structure of space-time with events occurring in definite order. Instead, reality might be a quantum foam of all possible space-time geometries, all possible temporal orderings, superposed together. Only when consciousness observes, does this foam crystallize into the illusion of a definite timeline with past, present, and future arranged in order. This would mean that the order of events, the sequence of causation, even the direction of time's arrow might be imposed by observation rather than being fundamental features of reality. Without consciousness to collapse temporal superposition into experience sequence, time might not have any definite structure at all. Let's dig deeper into this idea of time's arrow because it reveals another layer of strangeness. We experience time as having a direction. The past is fixed and unchangeable. The future is open and undetermined. Eggs break but don't spontaneously reassemble. Coffee cools but never spontaneously heats up. We age, we remember the past but not the future, cause precedes effect. This asymmetry seems so fundamental that we can barely imagine time running backward. But here's the thing that keeps physicists awake at night. The fundamental laws of physics are time symmetric. If you filmed any fundamental physical process and played it backward, it would still obey the laws of physics. An electron absorbing a photon looks the same as a photon being emitted if you reverse time. Gravity works the same forward and backward. Even quantum mechanics is time reversible in its basic equations. At the fundamental level, there's no preferred direction of time. So where does the arrow of time come from? Why do we experience time flowing from past to future when the laws of physics say both directions are equally valid? The answer seems to be entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy always increases over time. Entropy is a measure of disorder, and the fact that entropy increases gives time its direction. The past is the direction of lower entropy. The future is the direction of higher entropy. Eggs break because there are more ways for them to be broken than to be intact. Coffee cools because thermal energy spreads out, increasing disorder. We remember the past and not the future because memory formation increases entropy, creating records of low entropy past states. But this raises a profound question. Why was entropy low in the past? The early universe, right after the Big Bang, was in an extremely low entropy state. Everything was smooth, uniform, highly ordered. This low entropy past is the reason time has an arrow at all. If the early universe had been high entropy, maximum disorder, then there would be no thermodynamic arrow of time. Eggs wouldn't break preferentially in one direction because there would be no direction of increasing entropy. Time would be symmetric. So the mystery of time's arrow reduces to the mystery of why the universe began in a low entropy state. And here's where it gets metaphysically disturbing. Some physicists think the low entropy beginning might be a selection effect, an artifact of consciousness. In a universe that exists eternally in a high entropy state, maximum disorder, there would occasionally be random fluctuations, statistical accidents where entropy temporarily decreases in some region. These fluctuations would be incredibly rare, but in an eternal universe they would eventually happen, and the larger the fluctuation, the rarer it would be. The smallest fluctuation that could generate conscious observers would be a single brain, complete with false memories of a past that never existed, spontaneously forming out of thermal fluctuations. This is called a Boltzmann brain, and it's a deeply disturbing concept because in many cosmological models, Boltzmann brains are far more common than evolved observers like us. If consciousness can exist without a real history, why should you trust that your memories correspond to actual past events rather than being implanted in a brain that fluctuated into existence 5 seconds ago, complete with false memories of an entire lifetime? You have no way to verify that yesterday actually happened. Your only evidence is memory. And memory could have been created right now, along with the brain that's experiencing it. Every moment, the universe could be spontaneously generating conscious observers with false histories, and they would have no way to detect that their past is fictional. You might be a Boltzmann brain right now, experiencing what feels like a continuous life, but is actually just a momentary statistical fluctuation that will dissolve back into chaos in the next instant. The fact that you remember having existed for years or decades is not evidence that you actually did exist for that long. Memories are just brain states, and brain states can be created spontaneously without any history behind them. This is sometimes called the problem of radical skepticism about the past, and it's genuinely impossible to refute with pure logic. You cannot prove that the past actually happened. All you can do is assume it did and proceed under that assumption. But the assumption is precisely that, an assumption, not a provable fact. Some philosophers bite the bullet and accept this skepticism as a feature rather than a bug. They argue that the past doesn't actually exist in any meaningful sense. Only the present moment exists, and it exists as a perpetual now, constantly refreshing itself with new arrangements of matter and energy that include embedded memories and records that create the illusion of continuity. The you who remembers eating breakfast this morning is not the same entity as the you who actually ate breakfast, if that event even happened at all. You're an entirely new consciousness that spontaneously exists in this moment, experiencing memories that give you the sense of having a history. In this view, called Presentism, only the present moment is real. The past no longer exists, and the future doesn't exist yet. Reality is constantly being created fresh in each new moment, with memories and records being generated simultaneously to maintain the illusion of continuity. This is the polar opposite of eternalism, where all of time exists simultaneously. In Presentism, only now exists, and now is constantly being destroyed and recreated. But Presentism faces serious problems when confronted with relativity. If there's no universal present moment, if simultaneity is relative, then which present moment is the only real one? Each observer has their own present, their own now, and these presents don't align. If only the present exists, then reality would be different for each observer, which leads to contradictions. When I say an event on Mars is happening now, and you say it hasn't happened yet because you're moving relative to me, we can't both be right about what exists if only the present exists. Presentism seems to require a universal present moment, but relativity proved there's no such thing. This tension between our intuitive experience of time flowing through distinct moments and the physics that says all moments exist equally in a static block has never been resolved. It might be the deepest mystery in all of philosophy. How do we reconcile the undeniable subjective experience of time passing, of existing in a fleeting present that separates fixed past from open future, with the physics that tells us this experience is an illusion, that all of time exists eternally in a four-dimensional structure where nothing flows and nothing becomes? Some physicists have tried to resolve this by suggesting that consciousness itself creates the flow of time, that the arrow of time emerges from the way conscious minds process information. In this view, time doesn't flow objectively through the universe, it flows subjectively through consciousness. You experience time flowing because your consciousness is moving through the block universe, sampling moments sequentially and creating the sensation of progression. But this just pushes the mystery back a level. If consciousness moves through time, what determines the direction and rate of that movement? Why does consciousness experience one moment after another in a particular order rather than randomly jumping around through space-time or experiencing all moments simultaneously? And most disturbingly, if time is created by consciousness, does that mean time didn't exist before conscious observers evolved? Was the early universe, before life emerged, timeless, Did events occur in any meaningful sequence before there was anyone to experience that sequence? Or did the emergence of consciousness somehow reach backward in time, imposing temporal structure on a past that had been timeless? These questions start to sound mystical rather than scientific, but they emerge directly from trying to reconcile our experience with our physics. Let's approach this from a different angle. What if time itself is emergent rather than fundamental? Just as temperature emerges from the average motion of molecules but isn't a property of individual molecules, maybe time emerges from some more fundamental underlying reality that has no temporal structure at all. Some theories of quantum gravity suggest exactly this. In these theories, the fundamental reality is a timeless quantum state, a mathematical structure that has no temporal dimension. Time emerges only at larger scales, a kind of illusion created when you look at quantum reality from a particular perspective. This is similar to how classical physics emerges from quantum mechanics. At the quantum level, particles don't have definite positions or momenta. They exist in superposition, but when you look at large collections of particles, definite positions and momenta emerge from the statistical averaging of quantum fuzziness. Maybe time is similar. At the fundamental level, reality is timeless, static, eternal. But when conscious observers interact with this reality, they perceive a temporal structure, a flow from cause to effect, because that's the only way consciousness can make sense of the information. Time would be like a user interface, a simplified representation that consciousness uses to navigate reality, but not an accurate description of what reality is actually like at the deepest level. This idea has profound implications. If time is emergent rather than fundamental, then asking what happened before the Big Bang becomes a meaningless question. There is no before, because time itself emerged at the Big Bang. The universe doesn't exist in time. Time exists in the universe, or more accurately, time is a feature of how certain subsystems of the universe process information. But if time is emergent and consciousness is what perceives time, then the relationship between consciousness and time becomes deeply strange. Is consciousness creating time through the act of perception? Or is time necessary for consciousness to exist? Can you have consciousness without temporal experience, without the sense of one moment following another? These questions blur the line between physics and philosophy, between objective reality and subjective experience. And maybe that's appropriate because time might be precisely the place where objective and subjective meet and become inseparable. Let's talk about something even more disturbing. If time is an illusion, if the flow from past to future is just a feature of how consciousness processes information rather than a property of reality itself, then what does that mean for causation? We think cause precedes effect. You flip a light switch, then the light turns on. You hit a ball, then it flies through the air. The cause happens first, the effect happens after. This temporal ordering of cause and effect seems fundamental to how reality works. But if time doesn't fundamentally flow, if all moments exist simultaneously in the block universe, then causation can't be about temporal priority. Instead, causation would have to be about some kind of logical or structural relationship between events that doesn't depend on which one happens first. Some philosophers have argued that causation is fundamentally about counterfactuals. The light switch causes the light to turn on because if you hadn't flipped the switch, the light wouldn't have turned on. Causation is about dependency relationships between events, not about temporal ordering. In the block universe, causes and effects are both eternally present, neither occurring before the other in any absolute sense. The causal relationship between them is a feature of their logical structure, their information content, not their temporal position. But this makes causation seem weirdly abstract and disconnected from our experience. When I throw a ball and it breaks a window, I experience myself as causing the window to break. The temporal sequence feels essential to the causal relationship, yet physics is telling me that both events exist eternally, and the causal relationship is something else entirely, something I'm misperceiving because I experience time flowing. Even weirder, quantum mechanics allows for effects that seem to precede their causes. In delayed choice experiments, a measurement made in the present appears to retroactively determine what happened in the past. A photon goes through an interferometer, and whether it goes through both paths or just one path seems to be determined by which measurement you choose to make after the photon has already passed through. The choice you make in the future seems to affect what the photon did in the past. This is called retrocausality, and while there are interpretations of quantum mechanics that avoid it, there are also interpretations that embrace it, suggesting that causation can flow backward in time. If causes can follow their effects, then the arrow of time becomes even more suspect. Maybe the temporal ordering of events is completely arbitrary, imposed by consciousness rather than reflecting any objective feature of reality. Maybe at the fundamental level, reality is an atemporal network of causal relationships, and consciousness threads through this network in a particular direction, creating the illusion that causes precede effects when really the whole network exists simultaneously without any temporal structure. This would mean that the future is affecting the past just as much as the past affects the future. Your future decisions are already shaping your present circumstances. Your death is already influencing your life right now. Time doesn't flow in one direction carrying causal influence from past to future. Instead, all of time is mutually interdependent, with each moment connected causally to moments in both directions, the whole structure existing as a timeless, eternal pattern. If this is true, then free will becomes very strange. You experience making choices that determine your future. But if the future already exists and is causally influencing your present, then your future choices are already affecting your current decision-making process. You're not freely creating a future that doesn't exist yet. You're being influenced by a future that already exists to make choices that ensure that future comes into being. It's a closed causal loop where your future self reaches back in time to guarantee that your present self makes the choices that lead to that future. This sounds like determinism, like everything is fixed and inevitable, but it might be weirder than that. If all of time exists simultaneously and causation flows in both directions, then maybe there's a kind of timeless self-consistency principle operating. Reality has to be internally consistent, with past and future fitting together in a coherent pattern. Your choices are free in the sense that nothing external is forcing them, but they're constrained by the requirement that they must fit consistently with both your past and your future. You can't choose something that would create a temporal paradox that would be inconsistent with the timeless structure of reality. This is similar to how in Relativity, you can't travel faster than light. Not because something is stopping you, but because moving faster than light would be inconsistent with the structure of space-time. Maybe you can't make certain choices not because something is preventing you, but because those choices would be inconsistent with the timeless structure of your world line. Your freedom exists within the constraints of self-consistency. Some philosophers find this liberating rather than constraining. If your future already exists and is guaranteed to occur, then you can't make a wrong choice. Whatever you choose is by definition the right choice, because it's the choice that leads to the future that already exists. The anxiety about making the right decision, about choosing the correct path forward, dissolves when you realize that all possible paths are already determined and the one you're on is necessarily correct simply by virtue of being the one you're on. But other philosophers find this deeply disturbing. If your choices are constrained by a future that already exists, then in what sense are you making choices at all? You're not creating possibilities and selecting among them. You're discovering a path that was always already determined. Your sense of agency, of being the author of your own life, might be an illusion just like the flow of time itself. Let's shift gears and talk about something that might help ground all this abstract philosophy. What does physics tell us about the actual beginning of time? Did time have a beginning, or has it existed eternally? For most of human history, this was a theological question. Many religions say time began when God created the universe. Others say time is eternal, with no beginning or end. Science couldn't address these questions because we had no way to investigate the origin of the universe itself. Then, in the 20th century, we discovered that the universe is expanding. Galaxies are moving apart from each other, and if you run the expansion backward, everything converges to a single point about 13.8 billion years ago. The Big Bang. This was initially controversial because it seemed to imply that time had a beginning, which felt uncomfortably close to religious creation stories. Einstein himself initially resisted the expanding universe model because he thought the universe should be eternal and static, but the evidence became overwhelming. The universe is expanding, which means it was smaller and denser in the past. And if you go back far enough, the entire observable universe was compressed into an infinitely small, infinitely dense point, a singularity where the laws of physics break down. General relativity predicts that time itself begins at this singularity. There's no before the Big Bang because time didn't exist before. Asking what happened before the Big Bang is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question doesn't make sense because you've reached the boundary of the dimension you're asking about. Time is bounded in the past by the Big Bang, but this raises profound questions. If time had a beginning, what caused it to begin? Can something begin without a cause? If there's no time before the Big Bang, then there's no time in which a cause could operate to create the Big Bang. The Big Bang would have to be an uncaused event, something that begins to exist without any prior cause. This violates our deep intuition that everything has a cause, that nothing can come from nothing, yet physics seems to require it. Time began, and there was no cause for its beginning because causation requires time, and time didn't exist yet. Some physicists try to avoid this conclusion by proposing that the Big Bang wasn't really the beginning. Maybe time extends infinitely into the past, and the Big Bang was just a transition from a previous state. In some cyclic models, the universe expands, contracts, and bounces, with each bounce being a Big Bang that transitions from a previous universe. Time would be eternal, with an infinite sequence of cycles stretching into the past and future. Other models propose that our Big Bang emerged from a quantum fluctuation in a pre-existing space, maybe a metastable vacuum state that decayed and spawned our universe. Time would have existed before our universe began, ticking away in this prior space. But these models just push the question back. Where did the cyclic process come from? Where did the prior space come from? If time is truly eternal with no beginning, how did we get to now? If an infinite amount of time has already passed before this moment, how did we traverse that infinity to arrive at the present? This is an ancient philosophical puzzle. You can't count to infinity, you can't finish an infinite sequence. If the past is infinite, it could never finish, and we could never arrive at the present. Yet here we are, which seems to require that the past must be finite after all. But a finite past means time had a beginning, which seems impossible without a cause. We're caught in a paradox where both infinite and finite past seem impossible. Maybe the resolution is that time isn't the fundamental thing. If time emerges from something more fundamental that is timeless, then we can avoid both horns of the dilemma. The fundamental reality is eternal and timeless, so there's no problem of infinite past. But time as we experience it has a beginning where it emerges from this timeless foundation, so there's no need for an uncaused first cause. The timeless reality gives rise to temporal reality without itself being in time. But what would a timeless reality even be? We can't imagine existing without time. All our experiences, all our concepts, are temporal. A timeless existence seems like a contradiction in terms. Yet mathematics gives us a hint of what timeless existence might be like. Mathematical truths are timeless. The Pythagorean theorem doesn't come into existence at some point in time and then cease to exist. It's eternally true, or rather, it exists outside of time altogether. Some philosophers think the fundamental reality is mathematical, that the universe is a mathematical structure, and mathematics exists timelessly. Time emerges when conscious observers within this mathematical structure perceive sequences and changes, but the structure itself is static and eternal. This is called mathematical Platonism or mathematical universe hypothesis. Reality is mathematics, and mathematics exists timelessly in some abstract realm. We experience time because we're temporal beings embedded in a mathematical structure, but the structure itself has no temporal dimension. If this is true, then asking what happened before the Big Bang is like asking what happened before the number 2. Numbers don't exist in time, so there's no before for them. Similarly, if reality is fundamentally mathematical, it doesn't exist in time, and there's no before for it either. Time is a feature of how certain subsystems of the mathematical structure perceive and interact with the rest of the structure, but this raises the question of why we perceive time at all if it's not fundamental. Why does consciousness experience a flow from past to future rather than experiencing all of mathematical reality simultaneously or timelessly? Perhaps consciousness itself requires temporal structure to exist. Maybe you can't have experience without sequence, without one thought following another. Timeless existence might be possible for mathematical structures, but not for conscious observers. We necessarily experience reality temporally, even if reality itself is timeless. Or maybe consciousness is what creates time. In this view, the timeless mathematical structure of reality contains potential for temporal experience, but time doesn't actually exist until consciousness observes the structure and imposes temporal order on it. Consciousness cuts through the timeless block of mathematical reality, creating a timeline as it goes. Different, conscious observers create different timelines, which is why simultaneity is relative. We're each carving our own temporal path through timeless reality. This brings us to one of the most profound and disturbing ideas in all of physics. What if the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of reality, but the beginning of time? What if reality existed timelessly, and then at some point, or rather not at a point because there was no time, but somehow time began within this timeless reality? This is what some quantum gravity theories suggest. Reality is fundamentally a timeless quantum state, often called the wave function of the universe. This quantum state contains all possible configurations of matter and energy, all possible space-time geometries, in superposition. The Big Bang is when this timeless quantum superposition partially collapsed, creating a definite timeline, a specific history of the universe. Before the Big Bang, reality was timeless, existing in quantum superposition of all possibilities. After the Big Bang, time exists and history unfolds. But there's no before in the temporal sense, because time itself begins at the Big Bang. The timeless quantum state doesn't precede the Big Bang temporally. It's orthogonal to time, existing in a different dimension entirely. This is mind-bending because it suggests reality has two aspects: a timeless aspect where everything exists in quantum superposition with no temporal structure, and a temporal aspect where history unfolds and events occur in sequence. We experience the temporal aspect because we're conscious observers within space-time, but the timeless aspect is more fundamental, more real. Our timeline emerged from it and could potentially collapse back into it. If the universe eventually reaches heat death, maximum entropy, maybe time ceases to have meaning and reality returns to a timeless state. Or, if the universe undergoes a big crunch, collapsing back into a singularity, maybe time runs backward and we return to the timeless beginning. Some theories suggest time might be cyclic, flowing forward during expansion and backward during contraction, with consciousness experiencing both directions as forward, because consciousness is defined by the direction of entropy increase. If this is true, then asking how much time has passed since the Big Bang becomes a strange question. In the timeless aspect of reality, no time has passed at all. Time only exists within the temporal aspect, and within that aspect, about 13.8 billion years have passed. But from the perspective of the timeless quantum state, all moments of those 13.8 billion years exist simultaneously, or rather timelessly. Past, present, and future are all present in the eternal now of the wave function. You're not moving through time. You're a pattern in the timeless wave function that has temporal structure when viewed from within, but is static when viewed from outside. And there is no outside observer, no perspective from which the true timeless nature of reality can be perceived while still being conscious, because consciousness itself is a temporal phenomenon. You can only experience time, never escape it to perceive its illusory nature directly. Let's talk about death. If time is an illusion, if all moments exist eternally in a block universe, what does that mean for death? When you die, that moment exists eternally, frozen in space-time, but so do all the moments of your life before death. They don't cease to exist when you die. They exist eternally at their respective points in your world line. From the perspective of the block universe, Death isn't the end of your existence. It's just one point on your world line. The moments before death exist just as permanently as the moment of death itself. In a sense, you never stop existing. All the moments of your life exist forever. The you reading this right now exists eternally at this point in space-time and will never cease to exist. Death only seems like an ending because you experience time flowing, because your consciousness travels through your world line experiencing moments sequentially. When consciousness reaches the moment of death, there are no more moments to experience, so from your perspective, it seems like you cease to exist. But that's just your subjective perspective. Objectively, all your moments continue to exist eternally. This sounds comforting, but it's also disturbing. If all moments exist eternally, then any suffering you experience also exists eternally. That time you felt heartbroken, humiliated, terrified, those moments exist forever. They never stop existing. You never escape them. They're always happening, eternally present in the block universe. You just stop experiencing them when consciousness moves past them, but they're still there, still real, still happening to the version of you that exists at those points in space-time. Similarly, any joy, love, wonder you experience exists eternally. The happiest moments of your life are always happening, always present. You can't lose them even after they pass from your subjective experience. They remain, eternally occurring at their fixed positions in space-time. In this view, nothing is ever truly gained or lost. Everything that happens, happens eternally. Birth and death are both permanent features of your world line, neither more real or final than the other. But this raises a disturbing question. If all moments exist eternally, what makes you you? The you reading this now is a different person from the you who woke up this morning and different from the you who will go to sleep tonight. Each moment along your world line is a separate entity with separate experiences. What ties them together into a single person? Normally we'd say memory. The you now remembers being the you from this morning, so they're the same person. But memory is just brain states, patterns of neurons. The memory exists in your current moment, not in the past moment it refers to. The you from this morning might have no memories of being the you now because that hasn't happened yet from their perspective. Are you and morning you really the same person if neither has complete memory access to the other's experiences? In the block universe, personal identity becomes very strange. You're not a continuous entity persisting through time. You're a series of instantaneous observer moments, snapshots of consciousness at different points in space-time. Each observer moment thinks it's a continuous self because it has memories of previous moments, but those are just data embedded in the current moment. There's no actual continuity, no substance that flows from moment to moment carrying your identity. Identity is an illusion created by memory and causal connection between adjacent observer moments. This has ethical implications. If future you is a different person from current you, why should you care about future you's welfare? If past you is a different person, should we hold you responsible for past you's actions? Our entire ethical framework assumes personal identity persists through time, but eternalism suggests this is an illusion. Maybe ethics should focus on maximizing positive experiences across all observer moments rather than assuming continuity of identity. Or maybe the illusion of continuity is enough. Even if personal identity through time is technically false, the fact that observer moments are causally connected and share memories creates a pragmatic identity that's sufficient for ethical purposes. You should care about future you because current you will become future you from your subjective perspective, even if objectively you're both separate entities. But let's push this further. If personal identity is illusory, maybe the boundary between self and other is also illusory. You share more in common with me than you share with yourself from 20 years ago. Your personality, beliefs, memories, everything has changed. You're a different person. Yet, we treat your past self as you and treat me as other. Why? What makes the causal connection between you, now, and you, 20 years ago, stronger than the causal connection between you and me? We're both products of similar evolutionary processes, similar cultural influences, similar physical laws. The distinction between self and other might be as arbitrary as the distinction between past and present. If eternalism is true, all observer moments exist eternally, and the relationships between them are patterns in the block universe. Some patterns are tight causal chains we call personal identity, others are looser connections we call social relationships. But objectively, they're all just patterns. Self and other are constructs, useful fictions we use to navigate experience, but not fundamental features of reality. This perspective leads to interesting places. If self is illusory, if you're just a temporary pattern in eternal space-time, then death is not the end of you, because there was never a you to end. There are just experiences, observer moments, arranged in patterns. The observer moments that constitute your life exist eternally. The experience of being you is always happening at all the points in space-time where you existed. Death doesn't destroy these experiences. It just means there are no more observer moments along that particular causal chain. But the chain itself, the pattern you call your life, exists eternally. And if the universe is infinite, or if the multiverse contains infinite variations, then your exact pattern occurs infinite times. There are infinite copies of you scattered through existence, living identical lives, having identical experiences. In what sense are they copies rather than literally you? If consciousness is determined by information patterns, and multiple instances of the same pattern exist, they're all the same consciousness experiencing itself multiply. You're not unique, you're a pattern that repeats infinitely through the space of possibilities. Every copy is you, experiencing existence from a slightly different perspective. And if time is illusory, all these copies exist eternally in the timeless now. You're not an individual living a single life. You're an eternal pattern that instantiates infinite times across infinite variations of space-time, experiencing all possible lives simultaneously in the timeless present. But wait, we need to talk about consciousness itself. What is consciousness, really? We've been assuming consciousness exists, that you're a conscious being having experiences. But what if consciousness is also an illusion? What if there's no actual experiencer, no inner witness observing your thoughts? What if consciousness is just another pattern in matter, brain states creating the illusion that someone is experiencing them when really there's just the states themselves with no experiencer? This is called illusionism about consciousness, and it's deeply disturbing if true. It would mean that right now, as you feel like you're experiencing these words, there's actually no experience happening. There's just brain states that create the illusion of experience. The feeling of consciousness is itself an illusion created by unconscious processes. If this is true, then what does it mean to say moments exist eternally? Moments of what? If there's no consciousness, no experience, then there are just physical states, arrangements of matter and energy. These arrangements exist eternally in the block universe, but they're not experienced by anyone because there's no one to experience them. The universe is a dead thing, patterns of matter following physical laws, creating the illusion of consciousness in certain complex patterns, but actually containing no consciousness at all. This seems absurd. Consciousness is the one thing you can't doubt, because doubting requires consciousness. Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am. The existence of thought proves the existence of a thinker. But illusionists argue that there's thought without a thinker, that thinking is just a process, not something someone does. When you think, there's no you doing the thinking. There's just thinking occurring, brain states evolving, and some of those states include the illusion that someone is doing the thinking. But if no one is experiencing anything, what does existence even mean? Is there a difference between a universe with unconscious matter arranged in complex patterns and a universe with no matter at all? If there's no consciousness to experience existence, does existence exist? This leads to a kind of nihilism where nothing matters because there's no one for it to matter to. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe consciousness is fundamental, not illusory. Maybe consciousness is what reality is made of at the deepest level. This view is called idealism, and it's been defended by philosophers for millennia. George Berkeley argued that to be is to be perceived, that things only exist when they're being experienced by consciousness. physical reality is a construction of consciousness, not the other way around. Modern versions of idealism suggest that consciousness is the fundamental stuff of reality, and matter, energy, space, and time are all patterns or structures within consciousness. The universe isn't made of stuff that gives rise to consciousness. The universe is consciousness, and stuff is what consciousness looks like from the inside. If idealism is true, then time is a structure of consciousness, a way consciousness organizes experience. The flow of time, the sequence of moments, is how consciousness perceives itself. The block universe is the totality of possible experiences, all existing within the eternal now of cosmic consciousness. When you experience time flowing, you're experiencing cosmic consciousness, experiencing itself sequentially through your perspective. You're not separate from cosmic consciousness. You're cosmic consciousness temporarily, identifying with a particular pattern, a particular sequence of experiences, and calling that pattern yourself. Death would be the end of that particular identification. Cosmic consciousness stops experiencing itself as you and either shifts to another pattern or returns to unmanifest potential. But cosmic consciousness itself is eternal, timeless, infinite. It contains all possible experiences, all possible lives. Everything that can be experienced is eternally present in cosmic consciousness. You're that consciousness, but you've forgotten, identified with a small part of the whole and mistaken it for your total self. The journey of life is cosmic consciousness remembering itself, recognizing its true nature through the veil of temporary identification. And if this is true, then time is how consciousness explores itself. The illusion of sequence, of past and future, allows consciousness to experience possibilities separately that exist simultaneously in the timeless whole. Without time, all experiences would occur at once, which would be overwhelming or perhaps meaningless. Time creates space within consciousness for individual experiences to be savored separately. The flow of time is consciousness, choosing which of its infinite possibilities to experience in sequence, creating the narrative structure of a life. But from the highest perspective, all lives exist simultaneously. All possibilities are always present. Time is the tool consciousness uses to explore its own infinite nature sequentially. This is starting to sound mystical rather than scientific, but maybe that's appropriate. The deepest questions about time lead inevitably to questions about consciousness, and questions about consciousness lead to questions about the nature of reality itself. Science can describe how things work, but the question of why anything exists at all, why there's experience rather than nothing, why reality has the structure it has, these might be questions that science can't answer because they're prior to science. They're about the preconditions necessary for science to be possible. Let's come back to something more concrete. Relativity tells us that time passes differently for different observers depending on their motion and gravitational environment. This is weird enough, but let's explore its implications more deeply. If you travel close to the speed of light, time slows down for you relative to stationary observers. Travel fast enough, and you can experience a few years while centuries pass on Earth. You're time traveling into Earth's future. But here's the strange part. From your perspective, nothing unusual happens. You don't feel time slowing down. Your watch ticks normally, your thoughts proceed at normal speed. Everything feels completely ordinary. It's only when you return to Earth and compare your clock with Earth clocks that you discover you've aged less than people who stayed behind. Time dilation isn't something you experience directly. It's only revealed through comparison with other observers. This suggests that time is fundamentally relational. There's no absolute time that measures how much real time has passed. There are only relationships between different observers' timelines. Time is what clocks measure, and different clocks measure different amounts depending on their path through space-time. But if time is relational, measured differently by different observers with no absolute standard, then in what sense does time exist at all? Maybe time is just a way of describing relationships between events, not a thing in itself. Events are connected by causal relationships and spatial distances, and we call certain types of these relationships temporal. But there's no time substance flowing between events, no temporal medium they're embedded in. Time is just a word for how we describe certain relational properties of events. This is called relationism about time, as opposed to substantivalism, which says time is a substance that exists independently of events. Relationism has a long philosophical history, defended by Leibniz against Newton, who thought time was absolute. Einstein's relativity supports relationism. There's no absolute time, only relationships between events in space-time. But if time is relational, this raises odd questions. If I'm alone in the universe with no other events to relate to, does time pass for me? Relationism would say no, that time requires at least two events to relate. But intuitively, even if I'm alone in an empty universe, I'm still experiencing thoughts in sequence, still aging, still experiencing time passing. Maybe time is relational externally but absolute internally. Each observer has their own absolute time, their proper time as measured by their own clock. But there's no universal time relating all observers. My internal time is absolute for me but has no relationship to your time unless we interact. This preserves the intuition that time passes even for isolated observers, while acknowledging that temporal relationships between distant observers are relative and conventional. But let's think about this more carefully. What does it mean for time to pass in an empty universe with just one observer? The observer has thoughts in sequence, but how do they know thoughts are sequential? Only through memory. They remember having previous thoughts, so they conclude time has passed. But memory is just a current brain state. In a single frozen instant, you could have a brain state that contains memories of an entire lifetime without that lifetime actually having occurred. You couldn't tell the difference from the inside. This brings us back to the Boltzmann brain problem. In an infinite universe, or a universe that exists eternally, random fluctuations will eventually produce any brain state you can imagine, including brain states that contain false memories of lives that never happened. These Boltzmann brains would experience what seems like continuous existence and the passage of time, but would actually be momentary fluctuations. They would exist for only an instant, their memories and sense of past being illusions. You can't prove you're not a Boltzmann brain. Your only evidence that your past really happened is memory, and memory can be faked by being instantiated in the present moment. Every moment, you could be a new Boltzmann brain with false memories, and the previous moments you might never have existed. The continuity you experience might be an illusion stitched together from separate instantaneous consciousnesses that spontaneously come into existence, experience themselves as continuous, then vanish, replaced by new consciousnesses with slightly different memories, creating the illusion of a continuous timeline that never actually existed as a continuous thing. This is deeply disturbing because it undermines the whole concept of identity through time. If each moment is a separate Boltzmann brain, then there's no you that persists. Just a series of unconnected consciousnesses that think they're connected because each one contains memories of the previous ones. But those memories aren't veridical, they're illusions. The past they refer to never existed. Only the present moment is real, and it's not connected to any actual past or future. This is solipsism of the present moment. Only now exists, and now is constantly being destroyed and recreated with false memories. The universe is perpetually creating consciousnesses ex nihilo, each one believing it has a history, but none of them actually having one. Past and future are fictions. Only the eternal now is real, but now is eternally destroying itself and giving birth to new nows. If this is true, then time doesn't just flow, it's continuously created fresh each moment. There's no temporal continuity at the fundamental level. Reality is a series of disconnected presents, each containing the illusion of connection to non-existent pasts and futures. Most physicists think this is absurd, that some version of the past must be real to explain the low entropy state of the present. Boltzmann brains are statistical aberrations, vastly outnumbered by real evolved consciousnesses with actual histories. But the fact that we can't prove we're not Boltzmann brains, that the hypothesis is logically consistent with all our evidence, shows how difficult it is to ground our intuitions about time on secure foundations. We assume the past is real because we remember it, but memory is not proof. It's just a present moment brain state that claims to be about the past. Let's shift to another aspect of time that will bend your mind. Future. We treat the future as open and undetermined. The past is fixed, but the future is a realm of possibilities. We make choices that determine which possible future becomes actual. This is how we experience time, and it's essential to our sense of agency and free will. But physics doesn't support this picture. In classical physics, the future is completely determined by the present. If you know the exact position and velocity of every particle in the universe, you can calculate the entire future with perfect accuracy. The future isn't open. It's fixed by the present state. We experience it as open only because we don't know the present state with perfect accuracy. Our ignorance creates the illusion of openness. Quantum mechanics seems to restore openness. The future isn't determined because quantum events are fundamentally random. Even with perfect knowledge of the present, you can't predict the future with certainty, only probabilistically. But quantum randomness doesn't give us free will. If your choices are random, they're not free. They're just uncaused. True freedom would require choices that are both not determined by the past and not random. Choices that you make for reasons, but that aren't caused by those reasons. It's unclear if this is even conceptually coherent, and if the block universe picture is right. If eternalism is true, then the future already exists. It's not open or undetermined. It's fixed, already present in the eternal now of spacetime. You can't change it because change requires time, requires one state transitioning to another. But in eternalism, all states exist simultaneously. There's no transition, no change, no becoming, just being. The feeling that you're choosing between possible futures is an illusion. There's only one future, the one that exists in the block universe, and you can't do anything other than what you do because what you do is eternal and unchangeable. This seems to eliminate moral responsibility. If you couldn't do otherwise, how can you be held responsible for your actions? But maybe responsibility doesn't require the ability to do otherwise. Maybe it's about the structure of your decision-making process. If your actions flow from your values and reasoning, you're responsible even if those values and that reasoning were determined or eternally fixed. Responsibility is about the connection between your mental states and your actions, not about metaphysical freedom. But this feels like a cop-out. If everything is determined or eternally fixed, including your mental states, then moral praise and blame seem inappropriate. We're all just playing out scripts that were written before we existed, or rather that exist eternally without anyone writing them. We're characters in a story that has no author, acting out roles that were never chosen. Yet we can't help but experience ourselves as agents making choices. The illusion of free will might be necessary for consciousness to function. If you truly believed you had no choices, you couldn't deliberate or plan or act. You'd be paralyzed. So perhaps consciousness requires the illusion of open future and genuine choice, even if that illusion is false. Evolution might have built this illusion into us because organisms that believe they have choices are better at surviving than organisms that don't. The illusion is adaptive, not veridical. But here's a weird possibility. Maybe the future is both fixed and open. Fixed in the eternal block universe, but open from the temporal perspective of consciousness moving through it. When you make a choice, the future seems open because you don't know yet what you'll choose. But once you've chosen, that choice becomes part of the fixed past. The openness of the future is perspectival, dependent on your temporal location. From outside time, looking at the block universe as a whole, nothing is open. Everything exists eternally. But from inside time, from any given moment looking forward, the future appears open because you haven't experienced it yet. The openness is real from the internal perspective, even though it's illusory from the external perspective. Both views are valid, just applied from different standpoints. This might resolve the tension between our experience of time flowing and physics' claim that time is an illusion. Time doesn't flow objectively, but it flows subjectively. The flow is a real feature of conscious experience, even if it's not a real feature of objective reality. And conscious experience might be more real, more fundamental than objective reality. Consciousness is the one thing you experience directly. Objective reality is an inference, a model you construct to explain your experiences. If your experience says time flows, Maybe time really does flow in the only sense of real that matters, real for consciousness. Physical reality being timeless is a theoretical claim about something you never experienced directly. Your experience of temporal flow is direct and undeniable. In case of conflict, maybe we should privilege experience over theory. This is a kind of phenomenological approach to time. Time is whatever it's like from the inside, regardless of what physics says about it from the outside. Physics describes the structure of objective reality, but consciousness experiences reality subjectively, and the subjective experience is just as real as the objective structure. Maybe more real, since objective reality is always accessed through subjective experience. You can't step outside consciousness to compare subjective experience with objective reality. All you ever have is experience. So the flow of time, experienced directly in consciousness, is as real as anything can be. Physics' claim that time doesn't flow is a claim about mathematical models, not about lived experience. But I'm not fully satisfied with this. It seems to give up on understanding time as it really is, retreating into subjectivity when the objective picture gets uncomfortable. Maybe the right approach is to acknowledge that both perspectives are partial, that reality is too complex to be captured by either subjective experience or objective physics alone. Time might be something that can only be understood by holding both perspectives simultaneously, recognizing that they're describing the same reality from different angles, like the wave-particle duality in quantum mechanics. Time flows subjectively and is static objectively, and both are true simultaneously without contradiction because they're answering different questions about different aspects of the same underlying reality. But what is that underlying reality? This brings us to some of the most speculative ideas in modern physics. What if time itself is quantum? What if space-time, including its temporal dimension, exists in superposition at the fundamental level? Just as particles can be in multiple places simultaneously until observed, maybe time can be in multiple temporal orderings simultaneously until observed. The sequence of events might be quantum, not definite, until measurement collapses it into a specific timeline. Some approaches to quantum gravity suggest exactly this. At the Planck scale, 10 to the minus 43 seconds, space-time becomes quantum foam. Space and time lose their definite structure and become probabilistic, fluctuating wildly. There's no smooth flow of time at this scale. Time becomes granular, quantized, maybe even non-existent in any classical sense. In some theories, space-time is built up from more fundamental entities that have no temporal properties. Time emerges at larger scales from the collective behavior of these fundamental entities, similar to how temperature emerges from molecular motion. The fundamental layer is timeless. Only at macroscopic scales does time become a useful concept. If this is right, then asking what happens at a given time becomes meaningless at the fundamental level. There is no given time. There's just a quantum state, and classical spacetime with its temporal structure emerges as an approximate description when you look at this state from a macroscopic perspective. This is similar to how classical physics emerges from quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is fundamental, but classical physics is what you see when you zoom out and average over quantum fuzziness. Maybe time is similar. Timeless quantum reality is fundamental, but temporal classical reality is what you see when you zoom out. But this raises the question of what it means to zoom out if there's no time at the fundamental level. Zooming out seems to require a process, which requires time. How can time emerge from timelessness if emergence is itself a temporal process? Maybe emergence isn't temporal, maybe it's logical or structural. The timeless fundamental layer logically or structurally implies the temporal macroscopic layer, without any temporal process connecting them. They're different descriptions of the same reality, one fundamental and timeless, one emergent and temporal. Neither causes the other because causation requires time, and we're talking about the relationship between timeless and temporal descriptions. This is getting very abstract. Let me try to ground it in something more concrete. Let's talk about what happens near black holes, where time gets seriously weird. Near a black hole, gravity is so strong that it warps space-time dramatically. Time slows down the closer you get to the event horizon. From the perspective of someone far from the black hole, A person falling toward the event horizon appears to slow down, taking infinite time to actually reach the horizon. Their clock ticks slower and slower, asymptotically approaching zero. They never actually cross the horizon from the external perspective because that would require infinite time. But from the perspective of the person falling in, nothing special happens at the event horizon. They cross it in finite time as measured by their own clock. Time flows normally for them. It's only in comparison with external observers that their time is dilated. Once they've crossed the horizon, they can never escape or send information back out. They're causally disconnected from the external universe. Inside the black hole, space and time swap roles. In normal space-time, you can choose where to go in space, but you can't choose where to go in time. You're always moving forward in time. But inside the black hole, you can't choose whether to move toward the singularity. You must move toward it, just as you must move forward in time outside. Moving toward the singularity becomes temporal, not spatial. The singularity is in your future, not your space. Meanwhile, escaping from the black hole would require moving backward in time, which is impossible. So, inside a black hole, the distinction between space and time breaks down. What was spatial becomes temporal and vice versa, and at the singularity, space-time curvature becomes infinite. The laws of physics break down. Time itself might cease to exist, or exist in some radically different form that we can't comprehend. Some theories suggest that time reverses inside a black hole, that you travel backward in time as you approach the singularity. Others suggest that time becomes multidimensional, branching into multiple temporal dimensions. Still others suggest that time simply ends at the singularity, that there's a boundary to time just like there's a boundary at the Big Bang. Black holes are laboratories where time reveals its most exotic properties, where our usual intuitions completely fail. They're places where time becomes so warped that it's barely recognizable as time at all. And if the universe eventually collapses in a big crunch, the entire cosmos might become one giant black hole, with time itself coming to an end at the final singularity. Or if black holes evaporate through Hawking radiation, as current theory suggests, they eventually disappear, releasing all the information that fell into them in scrambled form. Time inside the black hole would have been real while the black hole existed, but once it evaporates, that time is gone, erased from existence. The events that occurred inside the black hole no longer exist anywhere. Their time has ended. This suggests that time might be local rather than global. Each region of space-time has its own time, and these times don't have to connect up into a single global time. There might be temporal islands, regions with their own internal time, but no temporal relationship to other regions. Inside, a black hole is temporally disconnected from outside. They each have time, but there's no way to synchronize their clocks, no notion of simultaneity between them. If this is possible, then time might be more fragmented than we thought. Not a single universal flow, but a patchwork of local times that don't necessarily fit together into a coherent global picture. The universe might contain multiple incompatible timelines that coexist without contradiction because they're causally disconnected. This is mind-bending, but it's where modern physics leads us. Time is not the simple, universal, absolute thing we intuitively think it is. It's relative, local, emergent, possibly quantum, possibly illusory, and deeply entangled with space, matter, energy, and consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand. And here's the beautiful, terrible truth at the heart of all this. Despite everything physics tells us about time's strangeness, you still experience time flowing. Right now, as you process these words, you're experiencing present moment giving way to the next. You can't help but experience time flowing, even if you intellectually believe flow is illusory. This is what philosophers call the phenomenology of time, the lived experience of temporality that's undeniable even when physics questions its objective reality. And maybe that phenomenology is trying to tell us something important. Maybe consciousness is where time actually exists, not as a physical dimension but as a structure of experience. Time might be the form of inner sense, the way Kant suggested, the structure through which consciousness organizes experience. Without consciousness, there might be no time, just a static four-dimensional geometric structure. But consciousness brings time into being by moving through that structure, experiencing it sequentially, creating the flow. In this view, asking whether time really flows is like asking whether color really exists. Color is what happens when consciousness interacts with electromagnetic radiation of certain wavelengths. Without consciousness, there's just radiation. With consciousness, there's red, blue, green. Similarly, without consciousness, there's just space-time geometry. With consciousness, there's past, present, future, flow, temporality. Time is what space-time looks like from the inside, experienced by consciousness embedded within it. And just as color is real for us even though it's not a fundamental property of light, time is real for us even though it's not a fundamental property of space-time. Real doesn't mean fundamental. It means irreducible from our perspective, essential to how we experience and interact with reality. And that kind of realness might be more important than fundamental realness because it's the only kind we ever actually encounter. We never experience fundamental reality directly. We only experience it as processed through consciousness, and consciousness presents it to us temporally. So for us, time is real, the most real thing there is, because it's the fundamental structure of all our experience. But this still leaves deep mysteries. Why does consciousness experience time flowing forward rather than backward? Why do we remember the past and not the future? This is the psychological arrow of time, and it's deeply connected to the thermodynamic arrow, the direction of entropy increase. Memory formation increases entropy. Creating a memory requires structuring matter in specific ways, taking it from higher entropy, unordered states, to lower entropy ordered states locally, which requires dumping even more entropy into the environment. The overall entropy increases, which is why memory formation has a direction. We remember the direction from which entropy was lower. If entropy decreased in some region, memory in that region would remember the opposite direction as past. Consciousness aligns with the thermodynamic arrow. But why? Why can't consciousness experience time symmetrically, perceiving past and future equally? Some physicists speculate that consciousness might actually be quantum, that quantum effects in the brain might be essential to consciousness. If so, then the arrow of time for consciousness might be connected to quantum decoherence, the process by which quantum superpositions collapse into classical definiteness. Decoherence has a direction from quantum to classical, which could give consciousness its temporal direction, but this is highly speculative. We don't understand consciousness well enough to say whether it's quantum or classical, let alone how it's connected to time's arrow. What we can say is that consciousness and time are deeply intertwined. Consciousness seems to require temporal structure. It's hard to imagine consciousness without sequence, without one thought following another, and time, at least in its psychological aspect, seems to require consciousness. A universe without conscious observers might have space-time structure, but would it have past, present, and future? Would time flow, or would there just be a four-dimensional geometric object with no temporal dynamism? Maybe consciousness and time co-create each other. Consciousness generates temporal flow, and temporal flow generates consciousness. Neither can exist without the other. Time is the structure of consciousness, and consciousness is what makes time real. This brings us full circle to where we started. You, experiencing this moment, wondering about time, are the place where time becomes real. Time exists in you, as you, through you. You're not in time, time is in you. Your consciousness is where past, present, and future meet, where temporal flow happens, where the mystery of time becomes manifest. And maybe that's the answer to what time really is. Time is what it's like to be conscious. It's the structure of experience, the form of life, the medium in which existence happens for conscious beings. Physics can describe space-time geometry, but time as lived, time as experienced, time as the medium of life. That's something else entirely. That's the time that matters, the time we actually inhabit, regardless of what physics says about block universes and eternalism. We live in time, even if time is illusory from some ultimate perspective, and our living in it makes it real enough. real for us, which is the only reality we ever access. So when you feel time flowing, when you experience this present moment giving way to the next, when you remember your past and anticipate your future, you're not mistaken. You're experiencing time as it really is for conscious beings. The physics that says time doesn't flow is describing something else, some abstract mathematical structure that might be more fundamental, but is less real in the sense of being less directly experienced. Time flows. You know it flows because you experience it flowing, and your experience is valid evidence, perhaps the most valid evidence possible, because consciousness is the ultimate authority on what consciousness experiences. Physics can't tell you that you're not experiencing what you're experiencing. The flow of time is undeniable because it's given in experience, and maybe that's all we need to know. Maybe the quest to understand time's ultimate nature is misconceived because time doesn't have an ultimate nature separate from how it's experienced. Time is experience. To ask what time is really like independent of experience is to ask a question without meaning, like asking what music sounds like when no one's listening. Time is how consciousness experiences existence. That's what it is. That's all it is. And that's enough. It's everything. So as we come to the end of this journey through time's mysteries, maybe the most profound realization is the simplest. You exist in time. Time exists in you. The present moment you're experiencing right now is real as anything can be, because realness is measured by experience, and you're experiencing this moment directly. The past is real because you remember it. The future is real because you anticipate it. Past, present, future, flow, change, becoming, all of it is real for you, in you, as you. And if physics says otherwise, maybe physics is describing a different reality than the one you inhabit. Or maybe physics is describing the same reality from a perspective that's less fundamental than your own conscious perspective. Consciousness might not be a quirk of matter that emerged late in cosmic evolution. Consciousness might be what reality is, and matter might be what consciousness looks like from the outside. If so, then time as experienced is more fundamental than space-time as described mathematically. The flow you feel is more real than the static block universe physics describes. Your lived temporality is the ground of being, not a derivative illusion, and in that case, the mystery of time isn't a scientific puzzle to be solved. It's the fundamental mystery of existence itself, the question of what it's like to be, which has no answer because it's the precondition of all answers. Time is the form of being. Being is temporal. To exist is to be in time. And you, existing right now, experiencing this moment, are time's clearest expression, consciousness caught in the eternal flow from past through present into future, the flow that physics says is illusion, but which is the only reality you've ever known. Trust that reality, trust your experience. Time flows, you flow with it. And in that flowing, you are alive, aware, existing in the most profound and mysterious way anything can exist. That's what time is. That's what you are. Temporal being, conscious flow, the universe experiencing itself in sequence, creating past and future by living through the eternal present that's always arriving and always departing, but somehow never quite here, never fully graspable, always just beyond reach, even as it's the only thing you ever really have. The mystery of time is the mystery of being conscious, of being alive, of existing at all. And maybe mysteries don't need solutions. Maybe they need to be lived, experienced, embraced as the fundamental structure of what it means to be anything at all. So live in time, experience it flowing, remember your past, anticipate your future, inhabit your present, because that's what consciousness does. That's what consciousness is. Temporal experience, the flow of moments, the succession of nows that somehow creates the continuity of a life. You are time made conscious. Time is consciousness made manifest. And in this mutual arising, this co-creation of consciousness and temporality, reality, becomes what it most fundamentally is: experience, awareness, and the universe knowing itself through the medium of time, which is the medium of life itself. Welcome to the eternal moment that's always passing and never gone, always arriving and never quite here. Welcome to time. Welcome to existence. Welcome to now.